Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Joe, he's Nick, and you are listening to The Nick and Joe Show, coming to you partly from the Think Radio Broadcast Centre in Canada's national capital city of Ottawa, and partly from North Bay, which is somewhere in the boonies of Ontario in the wilderness. And yeah, okay, I know all you guys up there in North Bay that are listening to the show tonight, I'm going to start getting texts and emails from you going, how could you say we're in the wilderness or whatever? I know. North Bay is not really in the wilderness. But Nick's up there, and Nick's in the hotel, and we've been having quite the discussion here. If you're listening to the live show, you know what it was about. Of course, if you were listening to the podcast, you listened to it the other day or even yesterday. And we've been tearing a strip off of those guys in the government, Nick. Are you there, my friend?
I am.
Okay.
And they deserve every strip they've got being torn off.
You think so, eh?
Oh, I'm being kind.
Yes, you are.
Let's face it, the kind of trampling they're doing. I mean, I go back to the church story. You're telling me that people who just want to gather together and pray is somehow this massive healthcare threat, and that you should be more afraid of that than you are of the national debt? That it's okay to allow liquor stores and big box stores and other places like that to be open while you close a church? Is that what you're telling me? Like, what kind of country are we living in? And I said that before, and I meant it, and I mean it now. Because let's face it, if you can't get your head around the kind of threat this is, because what are they going to do next? What's the next whistle stop? Where are they going to draw the line? Because we have no guarantee that they're actually going to use any common sense logic or reason in this. Even if you believe that the pandemic was worth fighting, what are you going to do? What's next? The reason people become afraid of their government is because they don't trust it. Well, who would trust this band of brigands with anything? They couldn't run. They couldn't run a one-man race to a two-man outhouse, and just at some point you got to say this has gone on long enough.
Okay, so I would recommend to you guys, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to the podcast, if you didn't catch part 2 of episode 135, it's up online. Go back and listen to it. Believe me, it's we don't pull any punches in that particular segment.
No, we don't.
But talking about common sense, Nick, and sensible government, etc., one of the things that I noticed when we were doing our pre-production discussions, etc., is talking about common sense potentially starting to break out. And I came across a story that the UK government, the UK High Court, has ruled that teenagers under the age of 16 do not or cannot consent on their own, so there's a caveat there, but they cannot consent on their own to the administration of puberty-blocking medications if they suffer from so-called gender dysphoria.
Well, that is excellent news. It's a blow for common sense. It's a blow for, let's call it, I don't know if I would go so far as a blow for parental rights, because I'm not sure that guarantees parental rights. It just stops, let's say, a 16-year-old who, and how many 16-year-olds don't go through all kinds of emotions, reactions as their body changes and they get, move through puberty and into young adulthood. It's not just the physiological changes, but it's the emotional changes. All the chemicals in their brain are out of whack. They're trying to figure out who they are, what their place is in the world. And all of that stuff you really mess with in a very negative way when you allow them to make choices that are not in their best interest Because let's face it, if somebody thinks that you want to take puberty blockers so you can go from being a boy to a girl, if you think that's healthy, then you need to spend time on a psychologist's couch. Because you don't get to pick your gender. You're born male or female. And to change that goes against the way human beings are wired. That is 50 years ago, they would have been right to call that a mental disorder. And I still think it is one. You want to take the gloves off, let's call it what it is. It's a mental disorder that you do not treat by making it worse, by saying to the young people, it's okay. It's okay to feel this way. As a matter of fact, we're going to help you feel more like this. Why do you think that in the transgender community, it has the highest suicide rate of any community we know of? It's like 42%. It's insane. And yet, people think, well, we can't tell them what to do. Yes, we can. They're children. And we are responsible for them until they become adults and step out in the world on their own. And until that time, we have every right to tell them what to do.
So let me give you a little bit of background on the plaintiffs in this particular court case. One of them was a person by the name of Cara Bell, who is 23 years old, from Cambridge in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
She was referred to this center that was at the center of the controversy that runs the UK's only gender identity development service as a teenager, and she was prescribed puberty blockers at age 16. And when she brought this case to court, her argument was, and she's 23 years old now, and her argument is that the clinic should have challenged her more over her decision to transition from a male, or to a male, I should say, as a teenager. Okay? And I'll give you some quotes from her. Growing up, okay, she says that she felt confused and distressed by her body. At age 16, she became one of thousands of girls, some as young as 10 or 11 years old, that are referred to, it's called the Tavistock and Portman Trust Clinic. And after three 1-hour appointments, she was prescribed puberty blockers, okay, and before she was eventually put on testosterone. And when she was 20, she had a double mastectomy. And she believed, she says, that the treatment would help her achieve happiness. But what she says now, okay, she said, this is a quote, "It was heartbreaking to realize how far down the wrong path I went." So that was one of the plaintiffs. The other plaintiff, okay, known as Mrs. A, was the mother of a 15-year-old girl with autism, okay, with a 15-year-old girl with autism who was waiting for treatment at the clinic, but the mother brought the case to court, okay, and her argument is that she thinks that her daughter with autism is talking about transitioning to a male, but that she's actually wrong, that it's not, she doesn't really want to do that, but I guess it's the autism that's contributing to these feelings. And what she says, quote, "It's frightening," end quote, "that there would be so little exploration of why a child might be feeling they were the wrong sex before doctors step in and give puberty blockers." And again, this is a quote from the mother. "It's distressing to have to wait and to try and convince someone that your identity warrants medical intervention. However, I think that the downside of getting it wrong, the outcomes of getting it wrong, are catastrophic." So in other words, these are not people who are against, in principle, gender, changing one's gender, okay? What they're saying is, you can't do this at such a young age.
Well,
and it seems now that the High Court in England is saying, you're right. They haven't thrown up, let's be clear, They haven't thrown up a blanket roadblock here. They're not saying, if you're 16 years old, you're too young to make this decision. What they're saying is you cannot rely simply on the decision alone of a 16-year-old. And again, let me stress, not just 16, but we were talking about children, girls, as young as 10 or 11 years old.
Right. That's just...
I think it's child abuse myself.
I couldn't agree with you more. And, in general, like I said before, I think it is best dealt with as a mental disorder than it is. Like, if you think you need rearranging the plumbing is going to solve your life's problems, then you need to spend time on a shrink's couch, not a surgeon's table. And I don't think there's been anything that come out in the last little while that changes my mind on that. Because, look, there's going to be people, there are a very small fraction of people who are born without a gender. Okay? That's just unfortunate, but that's the way it is sometimes. You get genetic mutations and things like that.
There are people who are born with both genders.
That's right. So, they need to be treated with compassion, and they need to be, looked upon as fully human beings, not as some kind of freak of the week. But when you have somebody who's decided that, look, I don't like being a girl, I want to be a boy, then the shrink needs to step in and say, why is that? Instead of the surgeon saying, well, we can fix that on Thursday.
Let me read to you a little bit more from this Cara Bell, who was one of the plaintiffs in this particular case, who was interviewed after the ruling was brought down outside of the court hall. She said, and this is a quote, "This judgment is not political. It's about protecting vulnerable children." Now remember, she's 23 years old, and she was one of the victims of this, okay? Again, she said, continuing the quote, "I'm delighted to see that common sense has prevailed." And the solicitor for both the plaintiffs in this case also gave an interview, and this is his quote, "A historic judgment," this is how he's referring to it, "that protects children who suffer from gender dysphoria." And he was referring to the clinic that was at the center of the controversy, and he points out that a culture, quote, "of unreality had become embedded in the Tavistock clinic," end quote. This may have led to hundreds of children receiving this experimental treatment without their properly informed consent, without them understanding what was really going on, and end quote. And so I think that I think this is a great thing, and again, the interesting thing about this, Nick, is nobody is denying that there is such a thing as gender dysphoria. What we're saying, or what they're saying, is the victims here are coming back and saying gender dysphoria doesn't have to be treated with these chemicals to block puberty, and it doesn't have to be treated through transitioning from allegedly from one sex to another, one gender to another. And that goes in line with what you're saying. If someone needs time and patience and counseling, this is a time when your children, when you're in puberty, when you're a teenager, when you're going through all of these issues with respect to sexuality and identity, etc. How tragic that we live at a time where so-called doctors can give you injections to stop you from growing into the person who you really are, and